are actually that much shorter. They're just labeled differently.
Can I ask, we're told that literary fiction is dying and genre fiction is thriving. And it reminds me of something you said once about you could write the Martin Amis novel if Martin Amis couldn't write one of your novels. I wonder if you think maybe so-called literary fiction is dying because maybe it's too self-indulgent, doesn't take the reader into account. What would both of you?
Well, it was a few years ago I was published on the same day as Ian McEwan and in this country, and I think it was the papers, mainly the Evening Standard or somebody, that set up this rather artificial contest between me and Ian McEwan. And I'm absolutely fine with Ian McEwan and Martin Amis. I know Martin lives in Brooklyn and he's a smoker. We get on really, really well. I've got no problem with the actual A-list literary writers, although I've got comments about what they do. I've got no problem with them at all, but then there's the sort of second and third rate literary writers and the certain critics and reviewers who back them, who are very snippy about genre fiction. And I honestly do believe that they can't write genre fiction. They just can't do it. Otherwise, why wouldn't they? Yeah. Because, fine, do your normal stuff, do whatever satisfies you, but just do a couple of genre books and you can send your kids to college, you can send your grandchildren to college, you can buy your great-grandchildren a house. Why wouldn't you do that if you could? And it's because they can't, because there's a whole different skill to it. Now, could I write what Martin Amis writes? Well, yeah, you just take out the plot and the characters.
Jeff, do you have any?
I think it's all about story, and I define story as creating living, breathing characters, both good and bad characters, and having them confront increasing levels of conflict, which conflict is ultimately resolved in the end. In my books, generally for a good way. And I think in these books as well. They don't necessarily have cheerful, happy bunny endings all the time, but generally there's a satisfaction about it. Now that's true whether it's literary or genre. These are my standards, of course. Shakespeare, I was talking about. Shakespeare was a genre writer of his time. Now we regard him as literature. Why? Because he had story, that concept of story. Literary authors like, I would say, Saul Bellow, one of my favorite authors, Theodore Dreiser, literary author, Hemingway. They created characters, put them in conflict, and resolved that conflict. It's as simple as that. There is so much self-indulgence out there in the creative arts. I myself would much rather listen to Beethoven than Schoenberg or Strindberg, and those are wonderful, wonderful composers. I want something I can dive into with my teeth and hands and enjoy rather than respect.
Okay. Well,
yeah, and I think that the content of literary novels has changed dramatically over the last, say, 50 years. If you think back to those big heavyweight writers, William Styron, E.L. Doctorow, was probably the last of them. Yeah. They were big books with issues and stories and characters and meat. And that seems to have faded away. It's all now slick technique and very oblique stuff with very, very little content.
And many books about, let's say, divorced professors in academia having affairs written by divorced professors in academia. There's quite a bit of that.
Naming names. Okay. Does anyone in the audience have a question? We've got time for a couple. Yes.
I guess most writers don't have the luxury of writing full time for a living. They've got to hold down another job as well to pay the bills. Do you see a downside to your status of only having writing? Can you give them any comfort?
It is literally completely impossible to complain about this job. This is absolutely the best job in the world. It's impossible to conceive of a better job than this. So to complain about anything to do with it is shamelessly self-indulgent. But I would say, yeah, it's lonely. It is, I came from the world of television, which was full of bright, energetic, smart people, and you would arrive at work and to hear the latest jokes and the comments and the punchlines, and it was intensely social and easy to over-dramatize that. It was fun for the first half hour, and then the rest of the day was a slog. But you were around people in a way that I do miss, because typically, you know, my intense writing period is usually, I start on September the 1st every year, and I'm usually a bit slow till after Christmas, and then I start panicking and think, shit, I've got to get this done. And so January, February, March are intense, and this year was no different. And probably in January, February, March, I probably went many, many times. I went 4 or 5 days without even leaving my apartment. I went probably 7 or 8 days without saying another word to another human being. And so it is a lonely job, and that is the only downside. And then you get, it's feast or famine, because then you go out on publicity tour or whatever, or come to these conventions, and it is kind of overwhelming, because all of a sudden after seeing nobody for 3 months, now you're seeing thousands of people in a week. So it's an odd life, but to call that a drawback, you know, it would be unforgivable to criticize anything about this job. It is just the best ever. And rather than give you consolation for having to have a day job, see, I couldn't have done it with a day job. I know that. I did it because I was out of work and desperate. I had to make a living. So my main tip for would-be writers is quit your job and give all your money away. And then you will focus, believe me.
For my case, I agree. That's it, 100%, completely. And I was an attorney for about 8 years or so, and I like the water cooler aspect of being an attorney. You know, just hanging out with people, and because I am a fairly social person. But then I left to write. I'd written about 6 books at that point, and I was making enough to quit. And I was single at the time, and I said, okay, I'm going to take a deep breath and do it. And I thought, oh my God, I'm waking up the next day. The whole day ahead of me to write. What on earth am I going to do? Well, I wrote for the next probably 10, 12 hours. Next day, same thing. I kept waiting for the shoe to drop. I'm going to be lonely. I'm going to be sad. And in fact, I did miss that contact, but there's nothing like the exhilaration of writing. If there's any downside now, I mean, I've written 37 novels, 80 or so short stories. I do this all the time. I wake up in the morning or when I sit down to write, and I get nervous, my stomach's clenched, my hands are sore. Am I gonna disappoint my readers? Am I gonna write a flop? Am I gonna write something that doesn't work for them? And it just hovers over you all the time. Then you get into it and you relax and you look at something and you say, oh, I think they're gonna like this. But it's always there. When you care passionately about something and about your readers, I think that edge has to be there.
It doesn't sound like there's much downside. Yes, we have this lady.
I love that feature as a protagonist. I often wonder whether you thought of doing a new series of a female.
Would you do a female?
Well, that's a great question on 2 levels, I think. First of all, like Jeff said, I see this as a partnership where the writer and the reader are in this together. So to some extent, I am the servant of the reader. That's how I feel internally. I'm not kind of self-indulgent enough or arrogant enough to think, well, I'm going to do what I like and people will have to like it or not. I believe we're in business together, as it were. And I believe that the only answer to that question is, would you like me to write something else other than Jack Reacher? If you tell me that, then I will, because I'm your servant. But the other half of that equation is, and this is something that writers discuss on a sort of existential level. Could I write a woman? Could I write a black man? Could I write something that I'm not inherently? Because I believe by observation that a man's life and a woman's life are different. You suffer from different pressures than I suffer from. And certainly a minority person suffers from different pressures than I suffer from. I mean, I was born with the incredibly huge advantage. I was born white, male, middle class, not disabled in any way. That is a huge, huge platform on which to build. And I would feel very presumptuous pretending to understand somebody that did not have those inherent advantages. And I wonder, as a literary question, to what extent really can somebody approach somebody else's experiences are so radically different? I would maybe like to try it. I mean, a short story would possibly be a good way to try it out, just feel my way into it. But on an existential